Hey, I'm Michael Dorinda,
And I'm Jake Bennett.
and welcome to episode 189 of the North Meet South Web podcast.
Yay. Okay, we're on it. Folks, last time we left off, I think we were talking about work trees, and then I think we also talked about GitHub tokens. Yes? Does this sound familiar?
Yeah, that
Okay.
sounds right.
It does sound familiar. Okay, did we talk about OIDC temp tokens with S3? Did we talk about that?
I don't think so. It doesn't ring any
Okay.
bells.
All right, should we jump right into it?
Tell me about OIDC.
Okay, I recently had to rotate all of the tokens for all of our IAM users as part of our annual audit, which, by the way, if you've never used Scout Suite before, it's really awesome. You can use it on Azure, you can use it on AWS. It will scan all of your different services that you're utilizing and tell you what you should do, like what is red, yellow, green, sort of like it'll tell you if you have any S3 buckets that have public turned on, or it'll tell you if you have any IAM users that haven't been used in 90 days or haven't had tokens rotated in over a year or whatever. And so it's pretty nice. It's like, how do you get all that stuff otherwise? And it's free. It's open source, really nice. Okay. As a part of our annual audit, we have to run Scout Suite and then go rotate our tokens. Ask Claude to help me. It did a great job. Also did not know that with the AWS CLI tool, you can do AWS login and it will open up your browser and it'll let you log in with that, because previously I was having to set up an AWS config that would you had some permanent token, which is just not fun. So
Yeah.
anyway, as part of the whole process, I rotated all the keys using a script that I had Claude write for me. It was go detect if there's only one token for this IAM user, and if there is, create a second one, and then link me to the Envoy or Forge location where I should go update that in the ENV. Right? Then I wrote a cleanup script that the next Friday I ran that said it would show me any of the tokens that hadn't been used in a week, and then I could deactivate them. And then this Friday I'll run it and delete all the ones that aren't used. So great, super cool, really nice. However, I forgot that in my GitHub Actions, I am also using those tokens.
Yeah.
Darn it all. And so I have to go update all those places where those secrets exist in my in my GitHub Actions. And those are per repository settings, and we have 20 of these things. So no fun. All right. What's the solution? Well, first of all, you shouldn't really be using long-lived tokens as secrets inside of your GitHub Actions. Michael, tell us why.
I mean, if they ever get compromised, they're
Boom.
just out there in the world to be seen and used by whoever has taken the ownership of them from you.
Exactly. And the thing is, it's those things are sitting out there for a year at a time. So if there's any sort of package that, you're pulling in your GitHub Actions stuff that somehow dumps out a secret, which doesn't actually seem that unlikely. It actually seems like that could totally happen. Some supply chain attack thing, your tokens are compromised, not a good thing. And also, if you're not being pretty careful about what those tokens have access to, you could also be in a world of trouble. For example, I have an application. The only thing that the GitHub Actions needs to be able to do is it needs to be able to write to this one specific S3 bucket that we use during our continuous integration pipeline, right? But I didn't want to have to create a whole new IAM user, and so I just reused that IAM user, and did the credentials, not realizing that now also, if that key got compromised, it would give access to lots of other stuff. Okay, this is a problem. So how do we solve this? You can use OIDC, which is OpenID Connect. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to set up a connector between GitHub and a provider of some service. In this case, AWS. So think of it almost like SAML. They exchange some keys, some tokens, and away you go. The way that this works, though, is you can't define a user in AWS. You can't define an IAM user. Instead, what you have to do, but let me define why. If you define an IAM user, it's going to use those credentials for that user. You can't do that. Instead, what you do is you define a role. So a role, then, you can say this role can be used by, and then you can specify these filters. So you can say only this repo from this OIDC Connect location can get a token for this specific type of permissions. So you create a role, you attach the permissions to that role, and then GitHub requests a token, which is a short-lived token, which lives for an hour and then expires, and that's it.
Mhm.
Super cool, really nice. And you can give something like, for my example, I'm writing to AirDrop, which is where we compile our assets and push them up to S3 so that we don't have to compile them in production. So I need read-write access in one of my GitHub Actions, but in all of my other GitHub Actions, I only need read. So what I'm going to do is I will create a role that allows for read-write, but in the GitHub action itself, I can specify an additional filter which says, when I request the role this time, only allow the read. So you can be more specific in the GitHub action so that if that one specific action was compromised, if the token for that one was compromised, number one, it only lives for an hour. But number two, it only has specific read access to that one bucket. So it's super freaking cool. And what that means is that when I rotate my keys, I do not have to rotate my keys in GitHub Actions anymore. And I get short-lived tokens, and I get much less permissions. So way better, win-win-win all the way around. So I'm implementing that Friday this week. After I rotated all my keys, of course. I've already done the work to do all the rotation, but OIDC coming this Friday. And I think you can do that with other services too. Anything that supports it, you can use to do that. So pretty cool. Discovered that, a couple weeks ago, and excited to try it out. Let's see how it works. I think it'll be really good.
I dug up some links on the GitHub blog about that. It looks very interesting. Fortunately, I'm not responsible for any of our
You don't have to do any of that
pipelines or any of the CI stuff anymore. One of the other guys on the team graciously took that over when they started and migrated all of our infrastructure into Kubernetes and things like that. So it's a black box now as far as I'm concerned. So
very nice. I'm curious how like permissions work for you guys, like on your teams. Like, what is you probably have like no one person has access to like all the things, right? But like, is it dependent on job title in your company? Like, who has access to what particular things, or does the most junior person have access to production databases, or how does that work?
No, basically nobody has access to production databases. There are a few of us that do for various reasons. I mean, there are controls in place, but there are some things that you can only do with production data, especially if you need to query something or figure out where you need to, is something an issue.
Right.
No, junior
so like,
people
how do you
don't.
do that? Do you have to ask
don't.
permission for that? Yeah, so like your offshore team wouldn't, right? But like, do you have to ask for permission for something like that and just say like, hey, could you get me a dump of those things? And then how does that work?
Yeah, that's really what it is. Usually people that need access to that kind of stuff will ask the people who have access to it. And then it will be provided to them, either at a high level. Here's a summary. Here's a, ask some specific questions about what you need to identify from the data, and we go and get those questions answered. But there's no, broadly, people have access to our Kubernetes environment. So if they need to go and run Tinker or run artisan commands, we've got that restricted to certain people, and that's all through a Bastion host through SSH access. So it's all audited and logged and all of that kind of stuff, because, for the most part, it's, partly about restricting access, but also having controls in place and audit trails in place for when people do need to access those things. So
can you tell me about that a little bit, like the SSH Bastion host, and then how you're logging all that? So are you saying that what you do is basically, let's say that you have the actual machine that's running the database. So let's just call that machine called database, right? And a lot of times if you want to protect that, what you'll do is you'll say nothing can access that database port 22, I think, unless it's on localhost, right? So only processes running on localhost can get to port 22, and so there you go, and that's it. So there's no outside access. But that's not super practical, because then you have to give SSH access to anybody who needs to get to that database. So instead, what you do is you say, well, except for this one other place in the firewalls table, you can sort of allow this one IP access to port 22. But that one is now locked down to only certain people who can do SSH into that machine, right? Is that sort of the idea?
Yeah. So the Bastion basically sits in front. It's the public host. This is a concept that it's been around for decades probably at this point, but essentially you've got one host, and its job effectively is to allow access into that internal network. So rather than VPNing into a VPC or whatever, a private network in AWS, you connect through this host, and it just acts as like a proxy. So you would SSH tunnel through the Bastion to whatever else. So the web hosts have access through security policies on AWS to talk to the database, to S3, to whatever they need to. So we don't actually have S3 credentials on these EC2s or on the Elastic Compute. There's no S3 credentials in there. They have access to S3 based on the role provided to the container. So it can just write to the things that it has access to. Same with the database. It has access.
There's no way you could leak a credential for that. Yeah.
Yeah, so we don't have to worry about that. And obviously then we lock down everything's private. I mean, this is S3 defaults now, but everything's private by default. You need signed keys or direct access to that information. So
but then what you're saying is anything that you query on the database through that Bastion host is then logged. Is that what you're saying, or what?
Not the queries themselves, but like the access to
access.
So when because we've got audit logging on the Bastion host, which sees who logged into it. Everyone's got unique credentials. It's not like a single set of credentials or anything like that. So we see which SSH key connected to the host. We can see that they went out, and then we've got obviously logging on the other side as well to see who connected to the other host.
This is interesting.
So it is we clamp it down as well. We don't.
Can you run like an artisan command on like one of the web hosts from that Bastion host?
Yeah, you can. You
just do that.
You've got to time it. You got to be careful as well because it's Kubernetes. If you're running an artisan command and the deployment comes through and tears down that server, you'll get kicked out. So. We try and restrict those things out of hours when there are not deploys happening typically.
Okay, and is there any way to restrict specifically what artisan commands somebody could run? No.
Basically you've got a running shell on that container.
Yeah, right. That's what I'm wondering. It's like it would be really nice if you could say like, okay, so for example, if I give somebody access to like a Forge machine, right? Oh, cool. Now they can do some Forge stuff, but there's pretty relatively granular permissions on the Forge stuff, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
Unless you need them to be able to run a command like PHP artisan q retry all, right? In that case, they either have to be able to retry, like they have to either be able to issue a command, in which case, if they get the ability to issue command, you basically have remote code execution, right? And you could do whatever you want at that point.
Yeah.
And so it's just
there's only so much you can enforce, and much of it is controls. Who do you give access to? Do you trust the people that that you have given access to do the right things? What is what is the implication? What is the consequence of them doing the wrong thing?
Yeah. And it's sort of like I want to give certain people on my team access to do things like, okay, like retry the jobs, stuff like that. And I could build a solution like myself to, or I could do like Horizon. I could implement Horizon, but Horizon only supports Redis. You know what I mean? Which is sort of annoying. And I don't need Redis everywhere. And so I can do that for some of them, but not for all of them. So now it's like I'm left building my own solution, which is what we're doing, actually. We are building our own solution for being able to retry jobs across all of our different,
I'm sure we spoke on Laravel News. Someone had built like a Horizon-like thing that supported.
We did, and I looked at it, and it's okay. I just don't want to have to. I just don't want to have to do it on all of them.
Yeah, should be fairly easy to point Claude at the database and say like, we need an interface that allows people to selectively go on.
Yeah, we basically
much easier
said
now.
Yeah, it totally is. So we instead of installing somebody else's package, we developed our own little micro package that basically provides a new API endpoint, which just gives back the failed jobs, the context of the error, and then gives us back the GUID, and then or maybe it's the UUID. I'm not sure. Either way, I think it's UUID. And then you can issue a retry all command or a retry on a specific command, and then it will give you back, how many failed jobs there are. So what we do is every half hour, we run a thing that checks across all of our different applications if there's any stale queued jobs, like they've been out there for longer than an hour, or if there's any failed jobs, and allows us to then retry it. So it works pretty decent.
That's right.
But
this is the thing. I've seen a couple of people tweet about it, and I won't be able to find the tweet now because it was like as I was falling asleep last night that there are these things now where, especially when you're bringing in packages, you have the weight of like everything that package does, but you might need it for one feature. So
Absolutely. Yep.
it's a lot easier. And the thing I think that AI has empowered people to do more of now is to just like build the things that they wouldn't have otherwise deemed worth the
Totally.
the thought process or the time to do it. And it just kind of enables you to yeah, okay, we need to do that, but it's not critical enough that we're going to dedicate an engineering resource to spend half a day on away from some other task. Whereas now you can just have Claude ticking along in the background, working on something while you're doing other important stuff, and just go, okay, we've got this thing now. So I sent it off on an adventure trying to figure out some of our broken Scramble documentation this morning.
Ooh,
and it
let's
just
hear about this.
ran in the background. It's not the Scramble was broken, but we wanted to introduce the ability to kind of gate API endpoints and gate that documentation behind like a secret key. And then we would say like, here are the resources that can be gated based on an attribute that we attach to those controllers. And then we've got an interface in Nova that allows us to generate like it's just a ULID, like a ULID. I think it's a base 58 encoded string ULID. And so we just generate that as a token, and we say this token has access to this resource endpoint, and then that will then get picked up by Scramble to then show that documentation in the UI. So these are things that we're making available to certain people. Only these tokens have access to it, whether that's they haven't purchased access to that, or they don't need that as a business, or it's some new piece of functionality that we're developing for an integration, and we only want to expose it to that integration partner up until it's either ready for public consumption, or it's it's only ever going to be for that person. And so we built this thing, and it goes through, and I had Claude build it, because once you start getting into building extensions, you're building the JSON and then tearing the JSON down, and you're parsing different things, and depending on the life cycle of Scramble, it may have already done something, and so you don't have access to look back at a certain attribute or a certain point in time. So it was an interesting experiment to see if we could do that. And so what the initial version of this restriction had done was gave us the ability to like hide the endpoints from the list of available endpoints,
like on the left hand side.
Yeah, in the menu. So like it doesn't show the get, doesn't show the post. But we found that it was still in the actual JSON document, it was still leaving references to the tags, and it was leaving references to the actual component schemas. So the resources were still showing up in there. And we thought, well, it's not a big deal to reveal that like there is a schema definition for an individual or a schema definition for an organization, but for the sake of completeness, let's make sure that we actually go through and scrub those things out as well. So yeah, Claude just went off on a journey in the background while I was working on other things this morning, and came back to me with a PR. I said, great, open that up in GitHub so I can have a look at the code and have a look at the changes, and then off we went there. So it was yeah, it's good to do that kind of stuff. Like I said, it was not a critical thing that those resources were in the response, but if you tried to figure out how you could create those resources, or if you could fetch those resources, there was nothing there. So yeah, it was just for a sake of completeness.
Yeah, we've I remember we did something not with Scramble necessarily, but with Preset being like this documentation builder for Laravel, and we did something similar where it was like, not everybody needs all the documentation, and so can we restrict it and say like, it's basically paywalled to only people who have logged in, and then once you've logged in, your user will have like a set of permissions that you can only get certain pages. And we use attribute as well. And this was before Claude. Oh my word. It's so funny because it's like pre-Claude, pre-AI. I mean, it was not that long ago. We're talking like last year. You know what I mean? We built it last year. And so it's like, if I was to do that now, I would have done it in half a day. Previously, it took a week, Stupid, but...
Yeah, it's all of these kinds of things that's like, you could do it, but are you going to spend a day, a week doing these things that are nice to have? Probably not. But now you can just set an agent off in the background, 30 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, doesn't really matter, and just come back to a working thing, and you just got to review it. I think the problem that we have now, this AI fatigue, is that now that we have decided, oh, it's simple to do all of these things because we can just set Claude off in the background. You still have to come back and review it.
Mm-hmm.
And, I work in finance, you're in, insurance. It's the regulated industries. And so there are still ownership and accountability around the code that we ship. So unfortunately, there's no vibe coding. Although we did, we just had 2 days of, strategy, and, part of that was looking at AI and furthering the whole of organization buy-in to using AI and figuring out where it can be used. And it's interesting, the kinds of problems that people are trying to solve, but it's also the kind of things that it's hard to explain to people the kinds of things that you can and can't and should and shouldn't be using AI for. Because a lot of what got built across these breakout sessions that we had was people that were taking data out of our, like raw data out of our data lake, our analytics platform, and then massaging it into providing reports. I'm like, well, this is all stuff that the analytics platform should just do, that we should just be able to build the dashboards. So it's interesting, but everyone's got their own solution. It's like, okay, well, this person needs to take that data and massage it into this shape, and this person takes that same data and massages it into another shape, and this person takes that same data and they create PowerPoint, presentations with it. Yep. Okay, the presentation is really the only thing that should be done through this kind of process. Everything else should just be, we should be able to normalize and deduplicate and handle all of this kind of stuff, and just present you with the data that you need. So it's interesting to see, yes, people are thinking about how they can solve their problems, and genuinely there will be times where sometimes you need to do part of your job in such a way that there is nothing, because it's some new thing that you've discovered that, if I could just get this data in this certain way, so you go off. But all of this is HTML, JavaScript. It's all running in the browser, and whilst you can share artifacts out of Claude, you can share gems out of Gemini, it's all stuff that's kind of living on the computer. There's no, the process we talked about a little bit was like, what is the graduation from this vibe coded HTML document that sits on your computer to an actual operational piece of code that is managed by the business. And we as an engineering team, we're talking about it at the end of the day, and it's kind of like, we have our customer facing application and our customer facing CRM, but we don't have internal tooling. And maybe we need to just have someone sit down with the different business units and figure out how to build the things that they need and build an internal facing tool. So
and then your requirements are much cheaper. Like, they don't have to be quite as stringent. And we've sort of got that where we have our external stuff is covered by SOC 2. All of our external tooling is covered by SOC 2. All of our internal tooling is not necessarily covered by SOC 2, but we behave as if it is. So like, we have all the same requirements that we have on our external stuff, but there are possibilities for exceptions, and it's all firewalled. And so it's all inside of our corporate network, so we can be a little bit more loosey-goosey with it. You know what I mean? Just like, that looks pretty decent, like push it. Like, it's not the end of the world. Like, you can sort of be like, push it, if it breaks, we'll fix it, sort of deal. And so we've had a recent sort of, like you said, like explosion of like internal tooling where it's like, hey, we need this. Okay, cool. Give me half a day. It's done, and it looks pretty decent. I ran it once. It looks fine. Like, if it breaks, we'll fix it. But like, nobody's depending on it for their life. You know what I mean? It's not like it's that big of a deal. So if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and we'll fix it. But it's like, it's sort of, there is, there's a difference between putting up a facade wall in your home and building a structural wall in a building that's going to house thousands of people, right? Mm-hmm. And I feel like sometimes we treat everything as if it's like a structural engineer problem. And it's like, it's just not. Like, it really doesn't matter that much. Like, you knock that wall out that you put up in your home, that's literally just for, for appearances, and it doesn't matter at all. And so you just kind of have to figure out what's the resolution of like, not the resolution. What's the importance of the thing that you're building? If it's really not that important, it's actually totally fine sometimes just vibe code the crap. And if it gets used, wonderful. If it doesn't, like, it doesn't matter. But it's now cheaper to build the prototype and ship it than it is to have the meeting about whether they should do it or not. You know what I mean? Like, just Just do it and try it.
And like the other thing that we found, we're taking all this data and we're running it through these vibe coded utilities. And then the interesting that came up in the one that my group was kind of working on was, okay, we know what the final data looks like because this is what someone has processed manually. They've gone through this process. This is what has been presented to people as like the actual data. And then in the process of trying to automate this, you go, that number's off. And it was significantly off. Oh, okay, our deduplication process was a little bit off. So let's review that. We got it close, but there was still this discrepancy that makes you think, okay, is there something that we're missing in the process that we have built? Or was what we thought to be the source of truth not actually correct in the first place? And then you go, well, how do you process tens of thousands of records to figure out where the actual discrepancy is and which is correct? And until you get that assurance, it's like, well, you can't really present one, but you've also got in the back of your mind now that maybe the thing that you had before that you thought was correct is maybe not necessarily correct. And so we took a third pass at it as, proper data transformation and looked at it. And it turns out there was 800 and something records in what we thought to be the source of correctness. They just came from somewhere that was not in the source data. So, it's interesting. And the thing is, we as like engineers and developers, we would think these things through. We would need to make sure that's correct. People that are not well versed, because we sat in this meeting, there was one engineer with each group just to kind of steer it a little bit and keep it on track. And it was like, we sat there and we thought through the plan first. What are you actually doing? How do we figure this out? How do we do all of this? How do we get from point A to point B to point C, which is what then gets delivered as a presentation? What is the end-to-end process here? And we thought it all through before we started. We didn't look at the code because you just assume that it's going to be terrible. Like you could see all of this CSS being written in inline style blocks in the head tag as it was streaming to the page. It's like, well, you've just reinvented Tailwind there for the sake of not pulling in Tailwind, I guess. But and it's the thought process that those other people may not necessarily have to actually verify the inputs match the outputs. So it's certainly an interesting time, but it's also a very critical time. And the thing is, the business is very supportive of everyone going off. Like we're going to do, I think as like the whole group, there's like an hour a day they're going to dedicate, an hour a week. Like, AI Fridays, we will go and you'll sit down with someone and you'll figure, and it's great to see that the business is forward thinking on all of this stuff and encouraging people to try out the tools and learn, because it's upskilling the individuals as well, to make sure that they, that they're prepared for this next wave of computing. But at the same time, giving them free rein to solve all these problems that everyone in every organization is like, if I only had this tool that could do X or Y, but it's not critical enough to the organization to dedicate any real resources to it. But if they can go and just do it themselves, it's really empowering to those people, and learning to use those tools is going to be critical for whatever happens next. But at the same time, not to discount, those people's ability to verify. It's like, it's not, you and I have been doing this for 20 years. There have been people that have been engineering for 5, 10, 15, 30, 40 years. They just think about problems very differently. And it's interesting to see the masses, picking up this stuff and being empowered to do it, but maybe not necessarily understanding the scope of what it is that we do, because we're all like, we all sit in the dark in our offices with our headphones on.
Or what the capabilities are. So it's like, I feel like we're living through this Photoshop era again, where it's like, I mean, it's not Photoshop era, but like, do you remember when people would see Photoshop and there'd be like, okay, let's give a stupid example. There's like a picture of like, an elephant in a picture, and they're like, can you like rotate it just a little bit so that the trunk is facing this way? Like they'd see a flat picture, and then the person who's like doesn't know what they're talking about says to you, as a person who knows Photoshop, can you just rotate that elephant like a little bit in the picture? And you're like, not how that works. Like you can't just like,
does now.
you know what I mean? It does now, but back then, people just thought you could do whatever you want. Like they just were asking questions that are like, that's not even possible. Like you don't understand what you're asking for. No, that's not within the realm of possibilities for this tool, right? And so people see these, so when they're saying like, oh, we can just do that, we can solve that problem with AI. It's like maybe, but maybe not. Like, you know what I mean?
Very different. It's like, it's similar, but it's a very similar conversation, but it's very different outcomes now because really, if you try hard enough, you can make the AI do anything. And the AI will happily say, yeah, I'm going to do that. And whether or not it actually does it or it does it correctly is another thing. Because we're looking at putting in some functionality that looks at financial data, and as part of certain lending processes, you need to provide an analysis of that data. And ultimately it's up to the broker and the lender to, sign off on it, to read it, to make sure it's correct and all that kind of stuff. But to have a button that you could say like, go look at this, and this, and provide a summary. That's all very well and good, but we all know how AI likes to hallucinate and make things up and answer the questions. So, talking about evaluations and figuring out like, how do we make sure that given the inputs, it's non-deterministic outputs, of course. So exactly how it's worded when it comes back will be different, but we need to make sure that it's directionally correct and that it's focused around the same information and it's presenting the same story, and figuring out like, how do we prompt the AI knowing that, this is what a broker has actually written. How do we get back to what we would prompt the AI to get this outcome? And that's going to be another, interesting process before you can start unleashing these tools. You need to make sure that the tools are going to provide things that are sound. And that's, a whole other thing. We've got all of this tooling around testing that the calls to the AI are correct. And all of that Laravel AI SDK and Prism, they have these fakes and things that you can make sure that you're not actually calling the AIs, but sometimes you need to call the AIs to make sure that the responses that come back, that it, like, not fake recorded fixtures, but like, given this set of inputs and this prompt, the response that comes back is correct within an acceptable margin of error.
Yeah. Have you heard anything about LoRa, LORA, low rank adaptation?
No.
So this is really interesting. It's like this ability to fine tune. We've all heard of like fine-tuned models, right? But basically what you can do is you can take something like a Quen model, like Quen 3.5 or whatever, which is like an 80 billion parameter model or something like that. And then you can make this little fine-tuned model of your own that can sit as like an adapter on the side of it, right? So instead of, so like with Laravel, rarely do we end up having to modify the base code. We just extend it, right? We extend a base class, and you do a service provider. You just put something sprinkle this little thing on top of it, but then you utilize all the work that was done beforehand. Just leave it the same. On very rare cases, you actually update the framework itself, right? You pull request it, but you just extend it, right? And so LoRa is basically like that, where you can sit it on top of these huge models, and it only trains this little tiny adapter. So it runs on, it can run on like smaller hardware, and you can also swap them out at the time of the request. So you can say like, I want to use this LoRa adapter if I'm trying to say these financial models that I have should look like this. So you can basically, what you can do then is you can say, I want to train this LoRa model. Here is my inputs. Here is my outputs. And here's like a category or something like that. Jordan Brill actually was doing this the other day. So he said like, here's what an original note looks like. Here's what it should be simplified to. And here's the category it should get. And so he took like, I think 4,000 different ones and said, take the original. I want you to do your best to simplify this note, and then compare your output to what we said the output should be, and then see how well you did. And so it does 15 at a time.
The notion of evaluations then, yeah.
Yep. So it does 15 at a time, and then it compares itself and gives itself a score. How close did I get? And then it adjusts its weights, and then it tries the next 15, right? And then it'll do like, I think it's either an epic, or an epoch or something like that. It'll kind of run through a certain number of times. So it'll run over that 4,000 like 3 times, and each time it'll sort of show it's getting better. But at the end of it, you get this little LoRa, low rank adaptation, model, this little fine-tuned model that you can sit on top of your other model. And so it will use the reasoning of that large model, but it uses your little fine-tuned stuff before it gets to that large one. So yeah, so like it works really specifically, really works really well if you have like a specific domain that you're hoping to inform it about, rather than having to depend on, the large AI builders to specifically have something that's trained for your data. You can say, nope, I just want to do this. So it's still non-deterministic, but it's much closer to deterministic outputs.
Interesting. Have to have a look at this stuff, because it'll be important for this piece of work that we've got, where we want to give people a leg up in terms of putting this stuff together, and then they just have to eyeball it to make sure that it is correct. But if we can't promise that it's going to be 95% close to the mark most of the time, then it's hard to kind of trust it.
Yeah.
I've said this before, that like ultimately it's on the broker and the lender to get the final say of what happens. But if you're the broker and you're just letting it through, and the lender comes in and starts knocking these things back, the brokers are going to go, well, I'm not going to trust that tool, and then so people won't use it. So
yeah, and like
interesting.
This is how like 11 Labs does this. So like they basically, it's not like they're retraining an entire model. They already have a model that produces voice stuff. They're basically just training a tiny little LoRa model on top of this, on top of their existing models, to say your voice sounds like this. Tweak the weights, tweak the pauses in between words. Here's the accent that it has. Okay, that's your voice now. You know what I mean? And they could do that in 30 seconds, a minute. Yeah. So that's what they're doing. Yeah. So it's a cool concept. Jordan was just talking to me about it the other day. He's messing with some stuff. He's all in on the AI hype. He's all in on it. So figuring out all sorts of really cool stuff. He's a smart one, that guy. Him and Andy Hinkle, my boys, working on the AI stuff. They're doing good. They're doing good things. So pretty cool. Pretty fun.
Excellent. Love it.
Hey, dude, we're at 36 minutes, 37 minutes. What do you think? You got anything else we want to talk about here? Or we want to wrap this one up?
Nothing else for now. Let's wrap it up.
All right, let's do it. 189, episode 189.
Yep.
Wow, got it first shot. I must have gotten good sleep last night. 189, everybody. Check out show notes at northmeetsouth.audio/189. Hit us up on Twitter at Michael Dorinda, at Jacob Bennett, or at North South Audio. And of course, if you liked the show, please rate it up in your podcatcher of choice. 5 stars would be awesome. All right, everybody. That's it. Until next time, we'll see you.
Bye.